Welcome to Stoic Vivu, where ancient wisdom meets modern life. I'm here to help you discover how the timeless teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus can transform your daily challenges into opportunities for inner strength and unshakable peace. Picture this scenario. You're running late for an important meeting, stuck in gridlock traffic that seems to stretch endlessly ahead. Your phone buzzes with increasingly urgent messages from your boss. The car next to you cuts into your lane without signaling, forcing you to slam on your brakes. You feel your jaw clench, your hands grip the steering wheel tighter, and that familiar heat of anger rising in your chest. Sound familiar? Now imagine a different response. What if, instead of letting that anger consume your morning and poison your entire day, you could transform that very moment into a source of inner strength? What if you could use that traffic jam as an opportunity to practice wisdom that has been tested for over 2,000 years? This is exactly what Marcus Aurelius faced every single day as Emperor of Rome. Leading an empire of millions, overseeing complex court cases, managing massive construction projects, and commanding armies in battle, he encountered the most frustrating, maddening problems imaginable. The stakes were constantly life and death, the pressures relentless, and the incompetence of others could literally cost thousands of lives. Yet Marcus discovered something profound about anger that changed everything. In his personal journal, which we now call Meditations, he wrote, "How much more harmful the consequences of anger are than the thing that causes it." Think about that for a moment. The Emperor of Rome, arguably the most powerful man in the world at that time, realized that his angry reactions were often worse than whatever originally triggered them. Marcus also quoted the ancient playwright Euripides, who asked, "Why give in to anger as if the world would notice?" This wasn't just philosophical theory for Marcus. This was survival wisdom for someone whose every decision affected millions of lives. Today, we're going to explore 7 ancient Stoic secrets that Marcus Aurelius, along with Seneca and Epictetus, developed to transform anger into inner strength. These aren't just abstract philosophical concepts. They're practical, battle-tested strategies that have helped people for over 2 millennia maintain their composure in the face of life's most frustrating moments. You'll discover why taking full responsibility actually ends most arguments before they begin. Learn the ancient truth about why people really upset us, and master a mirror method that turns judgment into understanding. We'll explore how expecting difficult people can set you completely free, uncover a gratitude practice that dissolves anger instantly, and learn how remembering death can end every conflict. Whether you're dealing with demanding bosses, difficult family members, road rage, social media frustrations, or any of the countless daily irritations of modern American life, these ancient secrets will give you the tools to respond with wisdom instead of reacting with anger. By the end of this video, you'll have a complete toolkit for transforming every moment of potential anger into an opportunity for growth, strength, and inner peace. 1. Why taking full responsibility ends most arguments. You're sitting at your desk when your colleague Sarah barges into your office, clearly agitated. "The Johnson presentation is completely wrong," she announces, waving printed slides in the air. "The budget numbers are off by thousands, the timeline is unrealistic, and now the client is furious. How could you let this happen?" Your first instinct is to defend yourself. After all, Sarah was supposed to review those numbers last week. The timeline came from the project manager, not you. And wasn't it her job to double-check everything before it went to the client? You feel that familiar surge of anger rising as you prepare to fire back with all the reasons why this isn't your fault. But what if there was a different way to respond? What if, instead of defending and counterattacking, you could end this conflict before it even begins? Marcus Aurelius discovered this revolutionary approach during his reign as Roman emperor. Faced with constant criticism, blame, and finger-pointing from senators, generals, and advisors, he could have spent his entire day arguing about who was responsible for every problem that crossed his desk. Instead, he developed what might be the most powerful anger management strategy ever recorded. In his personal reflections, Marcus wrote, "Blame yourself or blame no one. This wasn't self-flagellation or accepting false guilt. This was pure strategic wisdom." Marcus realized that the moment you accept full responsibility for any situation, you eliminate the primary fuel that feeds anger, the need to make someone else wrong. Consider what happens in your brain when someone criticizes you. Your immediate response is to scan for evidence that proves you're not at fault. You start building a case. Actually, if you remember, I told you about the budget concerns 3 weeks ago. The real problem is that nobody gave me the updated specifications. I would have caught that error if I hadn't been dealing with the Peterson crisis all week. This mental process doesn't solve the problem. It perpetuates the conflict. While you're busy proving your innocence, the actual issue remains unresolved. Tensions escalate, and what started as a simple correction becomes a full-blown argument that poisons your working relationship. Epictetus, who deeply influenced Marcus's thinking, taught that we always control our response, even when we cannot control what happens to us. He understood that blame is fundamentally about control. We blame others when we feel powerless, and we defend against blame when we feel attacked. But responsibility is different. Responsibility is power. When you take full responsibility, something remarkable happens. You immediately shift from a defensive position to a problem-solving position. Instead of, "How is this my fault?" you ask, "How can I fix this?" Instead of, "Why didn't you catch this?" you think, "What can I do differently next time?" Let's return to Sarah and the presentation crisis. Imagine responding this way. "You're absolutely right, Sarah. This is my responsibility and I apologize. Let me figure out how to fix this immediately." What does the client need to see to restore their confidence? Notice what happens in this response. First, you've eliminated Sarah's need to attack you further. There's nothing left to attack. Second, you've redirected all energy toward solving the actual problem. Third, you've positioned yourself as a leader who takes ownership rather than someone who makes excuses. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher and advisor to emperors, wrote extensively about this principle. He observed that most of our anger comes from the gap between our expectations and reality. When we expect others to take responsibility and they don't, we become frustrated. When we expect others to acknowledge their mistakes and they blame us instead, we become furious. But when you consistently take responsibility, you control this dynamic entirely. You're no longer at the mercy of other people's willingness to admit fault. You're no longer dependent on their acknowledgement or apology. You have the power to end conflicts unilaterally. This doesn't mean accepting blame for things that genuinely aren't your fault. Marcus Aurelius wasn't advocating for doormat behavior. Instead, he was recognizing that in most situations, we have some degree of responsibility. Perhaps we could have communicated more clearly. double-checked our work, or set better boundaries. By focusing on our part, however small, we maintain our power to influence the outcome. You might be thinking, but what if people take advantage of this? What if they start blaming me for everything because they know I'll accept responsibility? This fear is understandable, but Marcus discovered something fascinating. When you consistently take responsibility without being defensive, people actually stop trying to blame you. There's no satisfaction in blaming someone who immediately owns their part and focuses on solutions. Moreover, your example begins to influence others. When people see you taking responsibility without drama or defensiveness, they often start examining their own contributions to problems. Responsibility, like blame, can be contagious. Here's a practical framework Marcus might have used. When faced with any problem or criticism, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what part of this situation am I genuinely responsible for? Second, how can I take ownership of that part right now? Third, what can I do to prevent similar problems in the future? This approach works whether you're dealing with a spouse who's upset about household responsibilities, a boss criticizing your project management, or even a stranger angry about a parking situation. By immediately focusing on your response and your part, you remove yourself from the endless cycle of blame and counterblame that fuels most arguments. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire for nearly 2 decades using this principle. He faced rebellions, plagues, economic crises, and constant political challenges. Instead of spending his energy determining who was at fault for each crisis, he focused entirely on what he could control, his response and his decisions moving forward. Building on this foundation of personal responsibility, we can now explore another profound insight that will further reduce your daily anger and frustration. 2. The ancient truth about why people upset you. You're waiting in line at your favorite coffee shop, already running 10 minutes behind schedule for your morning meeting. The person ahead of you is taking forever, asking detailed questions about every single menu item, requesting modifications to their order, and then fumbling through their wallet for exact change while you watch precious minutes tick away. You feel your patience evaporating as you think, are they doing this on purpose? Don't they see the line behind them? How can someone be so inconsiderate? This frustration feels completely justified, doesn't it? After all, any reasonable person would order quickly and pay efficiently when they see others waiting. The person ahead of you must be selfish, thoughtless, or just doesn't care about anyone else's time. But what if everything you believe about why people upset you is completely wrong? Marcus Aurelius, drawing from the wisdom of Socrates, discovered a truth so profound that it transformed how he viewed every frustrating interaction during his reign as emperor. This insight helped him maintain his composure while dealing with incompetent senators, rebellious generals, and countless people who seemed determined to make his life difficult. The ancient truth is this: nobody does wrong on purpose. Almost every person who frustrates, annoys, or upsets you genuinely believes they are doing the right thing in that moment. Let's return to that coffee shop scenario. What if the person ahead of you is ordering for their elderly mother who has specific dietary restrictions? What if they're using cash because their credit card was just stolen and they're still waiting for a replacement? What if they're visiting from another country and are genuinely trying to understand the menu? What if they have social anxiety and the pressure of people waiting behind them is making them more nervous and slower? Suddenly, their behavior isn't malicious or inconsiderate. It's completely understandable. They're not trying to ruin your morning. They're simply doing their best in their own circumstances. Epictetus, who was born a slave and understood human nature from every social level, taught this principle through personal experience. He observed that when people act in ways that seem wrong to us, it's usually because they don't see what we see, don't know what we know, or don't have the same priorities we have. Marcus Aurelius took this insight and applied it systematically throughout his daily life. In his Meditations, he actually opens with a morning reflection where he prepares himself for all the difficult people he'll encounter that day. But rather than steeling himself for battle, he reminds himself that these people will be difficult because they don't know the difference between right and wrong. This wasn't Marcus being condescending or superior. He was practicing radical empathy. He understood that most human conflict comes from different perspectives, different information, and different priorities, not from malicious intent. Consider your last major frustration with someone. Perhaps your teenager left dishes in the sink despite your repeated requests to clean up after themselves. Your immediate interpretation might be that they're being disrespectful, lazy, or deliberately defiant. But what if they genuinely forgot because they were stressed about an upcoming exam? What if they planned to clean up later but got distracted by a friend's crisis? What if they have a different understanding of clean up immediately than you do? This doesn't excuse the behavior, but it completely changes your emotional response to it. Instead of feeling personally attacked or disrespected, you can address the situation from a place of understanding rather than anger. Seneca observed that most of our suffering comes not from what people do to us, but from the stories we tell ourselves about why they did it. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you immediately create a narrative. That person is reckless and selfish. When a coworker interrupts you in a meeting, you think, they don't respect my ideas. When your partner forgets something important, you conclude, they don't care about what matters to me. But these stories are almost always wrong. The person who cut you off might be rushing to the hospital. The coworker might be excited about your idea and want to build on it. Your partner might be overwhelmed with their own responsibilities and simply made an honest mistake. Marcus Aurelius developed a practice that can transform your daily experience. Before getting upset with someone, pause and ask yourself, what might they be thinking that makes their behavior seem reasonable to them? This single question can dissolve anger before it takes root. You might be wondering, but doesn't this just let people off the hook? Shouldn't there be consequences for inconsiderate behavior? Here's what the Stoics understood. You can hold people accountable for their actions while still recognizing that they weren't trying to hurt you personally. In fact, approaching someone from a place of understanding rather than accusation makes them far more likely to change their behavior. When you assume positive intent, something remarkable happens in your interactions. Instead of saying, "You always interrupt me because you don't respect my opinions," you might say, "I notice we sometimes talk over each other. How can we make sure we both get heard?" Instead of, "You're so inconsiderate with your loud music," you could try, "I don't think you realize how sound carries in this building. Could we find a solution that works for both of us?" This approach doesn't make you weak or naive. Marcus Aurelius was nobody's pushover, and he successfully managed the most powerful empire in the world using these principles. Understanding that people aren't trying to harm you personally actually gives you more power to influence situations positively. The coffee shop person isn't your enemy. They're just someone with different information, different priorities, or different circumstances. The coworker who seems difficult isn't plotting against you. They're trying to do their job as they understand it. Your family member who frustrated you isn't trying to ruin your day. They're navigating their own challenges and limitations. This recognition naturally leads us to examine how our own interpretations and judgments create the very upset we experience, which brings us to our next crucial insight. 3. How to see events clearly without getting triggered. You're scrolling through your work emails when you see a message from your manager with the subject line, "We need to talk." Your heart rate immediately spikes. Your mind starts racing with worst-case scenarios. Are you about to be fired? Did you mess up that project? Is this about the complaint from that difficult client last week? Within seconds, you've worked yourself into a state of anxiety and dread, your entire morning ruined by 4 simple words. But here's the fascinating part. Nothing has actually happened yet. You haven't been fired. You haven't been demoted. You don't even know what your manager wants to discuss. The email might be about a promotion, a new opportunity, or something completely unrelated to your performance. Yet you're experiencing very real stress and anger based entirely on your interpretation of an objectively neutral event. This is exactly what Epictetus was teaching when he made one of the most revolutionary statements in all of philosophy. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. This insight became the foundation of Marcus Aurelius's approach to managing his emotions during the most challenging moments of his reign. Epictetus understood something that modern neuroscience has now confirmed. There's always a gap between what happens and how we feel about what happens. In that gap lives our interpretation, our judgment, our story about what the event means. And it's that story, not the event itself, that determines our emotional response. Consider what actually occurred in the email scenario. Your manager typed 4 words and pressed send. That's the objective reality. Everything else, the fear, the anxiety, the catastrophic thinking, came from your mind's interpretation of those words. You took a neutral event and added meaning, context, and emotional significance that may have nothing to do with your manager's actual intent. Marcus Aurelius practiced this distinction religiously. As emperor, he faced constant crises that could easily trigger anger, fear, or despair. Rebellions erupted in distant provinces. Plagues devastated cities. Trusted advisors betrayed him. Political enemies schemed against him. But Marcus trained himself to separate the bare facts from his emotional reactions to those facts. In his personal writings, he would often describe events in purely objective terms first. A message arrived reporting unrest in Germania. Senator Cassius spoke against my proposal in the forum. The harvest failed in 3 provinces. Only after establishing the facts would he examine his judgments and emotional responses, always asking himself whether his interpretations were helpful or harmful. Let's examine how this works in your daily life. Imagine you're driving to an important appointment and you hit unexpected traffic. Here are the objective facts. Your car is moving slower than planned. Other vehicles are present on the road, and you will arrive later than intended. That's all that's actually happening. But notice what your mind immediately adds. This is terrible. I'm going to be late and look unprofessional. The other drivers are idiots. This always happens to me. My whole day is ruined. None of these thoughts are facts. They're judgments you've layered onto a neutral situation. Seneca, who spent years studying how our minds create our own suffering, developed a powerful exercise for this exact situation. Before reacting to any event, he would ask himself, what would this situation look like to a completely neutral observer? A neutral observer would simply see cars moving slowly on a road. They wouldn't see a catastrophe, a personal attack, or evidence that the universe is conspiring against you. This practice of separating facts from interpretations becomes incredibly powerful when dealing with other people's behavior. Suppose your teenage son comes home an hour past his curfew. The objective facts are, he arrived at 12 a.m. instead of 11 p.m. That's it. But immediately, your mind starts creating stories. He's being disrespectful. He doesn't care about our rules. He's probably getting into trouble. This means he'll become irresponsible as an adult. These interpretations trigger anger, worry, and conflict. But what if you responded only to the facts? You might discover that he stayed late to help a friend who was having a crisis. Or his ride fell through, and he had to wait for alternative transportation. Or he simply lost track of time while studying with classmates. When you respond to facts rather than interpretations, you can address the situation calmly and actually solve problems instead of creating bigger ones. Marcus Aurelius developed what we might call the objective reporter technique. When something frustrated him, he would mentally step back and describe the situation as if he were a detached journalist reporting facts. Instead of, that senator is attacking me maliciously, he might think, Senator Marcus spoke for 15 minutes, presenting counterarguments to my proposal. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb or pretending problems don't exist. It's about responding to reality rather than to the stories your mind creates about reality. When you see clearly what's actually happening, you can make better decisions about how to respond. Here's a practical framework you can use immediately. When you notice yourself getting triggered by any situation, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what are the bare facts here, without any interpretation? Second, what story am I adding to these facts? Third, is this story helpful or is it creating unnecessary suffering? Let's apply this to a common workplace scenario. You send an important email to your colleague and don't receive a response within 2 hours. The facts: you sent an email, 2 hours passed, no response arrived. Your story might be, they're ignoring me, they don't think my request is important, or they're probably complaining about me to others. But what if they're in back-to-back meetings? What if they want to research your question thoroughly before responding? What if they started a detailed reply but got interrupted by an urgent crisis? When you recognize that your emotional response is based on your story rather than the facts, you can choose a different story or simply wait for more information. This clarity of perception naturally leads us to an even deeper practice, one that transforms how we see not only external events, but our own role in every situation we encounter. 4. The mirror method: turn judgment into understanding. You're in the grocery store checkout line when the person ahead of you starts arguing with the cashier about a coupon that expired 3 months ago. They're raising their voice, demanding to speak to a manager, and holding up the entire line while they insist the store should honor their outdated discount. You feel your irritation building as you think, what kind of person makes such a scene over 50 cents? Don't they have any consideration for the rest of us waiting? This is absolutely ridiculous behavior. Your judgment feels completely justified. After all, you would never act this way in public. You're reasonable, considerate, and understand that expired coupons can't be used. This person is clearly being unreasonable and selfish, right? But Marcus Aurelius discovered a powerful technique that could transform this moment of judgment into profound understanding, and it might be the most humbling practice in all of Stoic philosophy. In his Meditations, Marcus wrote about a practice of self-reflection that he used whenever he found himself judging others harshly. Instead of focusing on how wrong or unreasonable someone else was being, he would turn his attention inward and ask himself, when have I behaved in a similar way? This wasn't an exercise in self-criticism or guilt. It was a practice designed to build empathy and dissolve the anger that comes from seeing ourselves as fundamentally different from people who frustrate us. Marcus understood that the fastest way to reduce judgment is to recognize our own capacity for the exact same behavior. Let's return to the grocery store scenario and apply Marcus's mirror method. When have you been unreasonably stubborn about something small? Perhaps you once spent 20 minutes on hold with your credit card company arguing about a $2 fee that you knew was legitimate but felt was unfair. When have you held up others because you were focused on your own needs? Maybe you've been the person fumbling through your purse for exact change while people waited behind you. When have you raised your voice when you felt frustrated or unheard? Suddenly, the person ahead of you isn't a monster or an inconsiderate fool. They're a human being having a moment of frustration, just like moments you've had countless times before. This recognition doesn't excuse their behavior, but it completely transforms your emotional response to it. Epictetus, who experienced both slavery and freedom, understood this principle deeply. He taught that we judge others by their actions but judge ourselves by our intentions. When we cut someone off in traffic, we know we were just trying to make an important appointment, not being reckless. When we're short with a store clerk, we know we're having a difficult day, not being mean-spirited. But when others do these same things, we assume the worst about their character. Seneca took this insight further, observing that the behaviors that annoy us most in others are often reflections of our own hidden flaws. The colleague who interrupts constantly might remind us of our own tendency to dominate conversations. The friend who's always late might trigger us because we struggle with time management ourselves. The family member who seems selfish might frustrate us because we recognize our own self-centered moments. This isn't about making excuses for poor behavior or accepting mistreatment. It's about approaching difficult people from a place of understanding rather than superiority. And understanding, as Marcus discovered, is far more powerful than judgment for actually resolving conflicts and maintaining your inner peace. Consider how this works in your family relationships. Your teenager leaves their room messy despite your repeated requests to clean up. Your immediate response might be frustration. They're being disrespectful and irresponsible, but the mirror method asks, when have you left things messy? When have you procrastinated on tasks that seemed important to others but not urgent to you? When have you gotten distracted and forgotten to follow through on something? This reflection doesn't mean accepting the messy room, but it allows you to address the issue from empathy rather than anger. Instead of, "You're being disrespectful," you might say, "I understand it's easy to let things pile up when you're busy, but let's figure out a system that works for both of us." Marcus Aurelius used this practice extensively in his political life. When senators opposed his proposals, instead of viewing them as obstructionist or power-hungry, he would reflect on times when he had disagreed with previous emperors or resisted changes he didn't understand. When generals made tactical mistakes, He remembered his own errors in judgment. When citizens complained about his policies, he recalled his own frustrations with leadership decisions that affected his life. This practice requires brutal honesty with yourself. It's easy to think, I would never behave that way. But the mirror method challenges you to look deeper. Maybe you wouldn't argue about an expired coupon, but have you ever been stubborn about returning an item without a receipt? Maybe you wouldn't interrupt people in meetings, but do you sometimes dominate conversations at dinner parties? Maybe you wouldn't drive aggressively, but do you get impatient with slow walkers on busy sidewalks? The goal isn't to excuse everyone's behavior or eliminate all standards. It's to recognize that we're all imperfect humans trying to navigate life with limited information, competing priorities, and varying emotional states. When you truly understand this, your anger naturally transforms into compassion. Here's how to practice the mirror method immediately. The next time someone's behavior triggers strong judgment in you, pause and ask yourself, what's the underlying need or feeling driving their behavior? Then ask, when have I acted from that same need or feeling? Finally, how would I want to be treated when I'm struggling with this issue? Maybe the person arguing about the coupon is dealing with financial stress, and that 50 cents actually matters to their tight budget. Maybe they're having a terrible day. Why? And this small frustration became the outlet for bigger problems. You've probably been there too, even if it manifested differently. This understanding naturally prepares us for an even broader perspective, one that helps us accept not just individual difficult moments, but the reality that challenging people are simply part of the human experience. 5. Why expecting difficult people sets you free. You walk into your favorite restaurant for a quiet dinner, looking forward to unwinding after a stressful week. As you're seated, you notice the table next to you has a family with young children who are running around, climbing on chairs, and talking loudly while their parents seem completely oblivious to the disruption they're causing. Your peaceful evening feels ruined before your food even arrives. You find yourself thinking, why can't people control their kids in public? Don't they have any consideration for others? This is supposed to be a nice restaurant. Your frustration feels completely justified. After all, you came here expecting a certain atmosphere, and this family is violating those expectations. But what if your expectations themselves are the real source of your anger? Marcus Aurelius, who dealt with millions of people across the vast Roman Empire, made a profound observation about human nature that can liberate you from countless daily frustrations. He realized that in any group of people, a certain percentage will always behave in ways that seem inconsiderate, incompetent, or annoying. Instead of being constantly surprised and upset by this reality, he learned to expect it. In his Meditations, Marcus writes, when you bump up against someone else's shamelessness, ask yourself, is a world without shameless people possible? He knew the answer was no. Just as you expect that some percentage of cars on the highway will have mechanical problems, some percentage of people in any situation will behave in ways that frustrate you. This isn't cynicism or pessimism, it's statistical reality. If you go to any public place, some people will be talking too loudly on their phones. If you drive during rush hour, some drivers will cut you off or drive aggressively. If you work in any organization, some colleagues will miss deadlines, interrupt meetings, or make decisions you disagree with. This isn't a breakdown of society, it's the normal distribution of human behavior. Epictetus, who observed human nature from every social level, taught that much of our suffering comes from fighting against reality instead of accepting it. When you expect everyone to be considerate, punctual, and competent, you're setting yourself up for constant disappointment. But when you expect that some people won't meet these standards, you can navigate the world with much greater peace. Let's return to the restaurant scenario with this new perspective. Instead of thinking, why are these parents letting their kids run wild? You might think, of course, there are families with energetic children here. This is a normal part of dining out. Instead of feeling like your evening is ruined, you might see this as just one of the predictable variations in restaurant experiences. This shift in expectation completely changes your emotional response. You're no longer fighting against reality. You're simply experiencing one of the scenarios you knew was possible when you chose to eat in a public place. Seneca took this insight even further, suggesting that we should actually feel grateful when we encounter difficult people because they give us opportunities to practice patience and understanding. He wrote that dealing with challenging individuals is like going to a gymnasium for your character. Each difficult interaction makes you stronger and more resilient. Consider how this applies to your workplace. Every office has that colleague who always seems to create drama, the manager who communicates poorly, or the team member who consistently misses deadlines. Instead of being constantly frustrated by these predictable patterns, what if you planned for them? You might think, in any workplace, roughly 10% of people will be consistently challenging to work with. Today, I might encounter one of those people, and that's normal. This expectation doesn't mean you accept poor performance or don't address problems. It means you're not emotionally destabilized every time someone behaves predictably. Marcus Aurelius developed what we might call the 1% rule. He observed that roughly 1% of people in any situation would behave in extremely difficult ways. 1% of drivers would be dangerously aggressive. 1% of customers would be unreasonably demanding. 1% of citizens would cause significant problems. But here's the fascinating part. Marcus also noted that instead of being angry about this 1%, we should actually be grateful that it's only 1% and not 10% or 50%. Most people, most of the time, are reasonably considerate and competent. The difficult ones stand out precisely because they're the exception, not the rule. This perspective transforms your daily experience. When you're stuck behind a slow driver, instead of thinking, why me? This always happens. You might think, there's that one slow driver out of the 100-aisle encounter today. When someone cuts in line at the coffee shop, instead of feeling personally victimized, you might recognize, here's one of those inconsiderate people I knew I might encounter today. You might be wondering, doesn't this make me too accepting? Shouldn't I have standards? The beauty of this approach is that it actually makes you more effective at dealing with difficult people, not less. When you're not emotionally reactive to predictable behavior, you can respond more strategically. If you know some restaurant meals will be disrupted by noisy families, you can choose quieter times to dine or select restaurants with better sound insulation. If you know some colleagues will miss deadlines, you can build buffer time into your project schedules. If you know some drivers will be aggressive, you can plan extra travel time and stay in the right lane. This isn't resignation, it's intelligent preparation. Navy SEALs train for equipment failures not because they want their equipment to fail, but because they know some percentage of gear will malfunction under stress. They're prepared, not pessimistic. Here's how to apply this immediately. Before entering any situation involving multiple people, Remind yourself that some percentage of those people might behave in ways that would normally frustrate you. A few might be rude, incompetent, or inconsiderate. This is normal, predictable, and not personal. When you encounter one of these predictable, difficult people, instead of thinking, "Why me?" think, "There's one of the people I expected to meet today." This simple reframe prevents the surprise and personal offense that fuel anger. This acceptance of human variability creates the perfect foundation for cultivating a practice that can dissolve anger almost instantly, one that the Stoics discovered to be incompatible with frustration itself. 6. The gratitude practice that dissolves anger instantly. You're rushing through your morning routine, already running late for an important presentation, when you discover that your coffee maker has broken. The display is flashing error codes, there's water pooled on the counter, and your kitchen smells like burnt electronics. Your first instinct is frustration. Of course this happens today. Why does everything go wrong when I'm already stressed? Now I'll have to stop somewhere and buy overpriced coffee, which will make me even later. Your anger feels completely reasonable. After all, you depend on that coffee maker every morning, you spend good money on it, and the timing couldn't be worse. But what if there was a way to transform this moment of frustration into something completely different? Not by fixing the coffee maker, but by shifting your perspective entirely. Seneca discovered something remarkable during his years of studying human emotions. Gratitude and anger cannot coexist in the same moment. They are like light and darkness. When one is present, the other simply disappears. This insight became one of the most powerful tools in the Stoic arsenal for maintaining inner peace during life's inevitable frustrations. The key is not to feel grateful for the problem itself, but to find genuine appreciation within the challenging situation. In the broken coffee maker scenario, this might seem impossible at first, but Seneca would encourage you to look deeper. You could feel grateful that you discovered the problem at home rather than arriving at work to find the office coffee machine broken with no alternatives nearby. You could appreciate that you have the resources to buy coffee elsewhere, something that many people cannot afford. You could be thankful that this minor inconvenience is the biggest crisis in your morning, not a health emergency or family tragedy. Marcus Aurelius practiced this technique religiously throughout his reign as emperor. Faced with plagues, rebellions, political betrayals, and military disasters, he could have spent his days consumed by anger and frustration. Instead, he filled his personal journal with reminders of everything he had to be grateful for, even during the darkest periods of his rule. When Germanic tribes invaded the northern borders, threatening the stability of the entire empire, Marcus didn't just focus on the military threat. He also wrote about gratitude for the loyal soldiers who volunteered to defend Rome, appreciation for the engineering marvels that allowed rapid troop movement, and thankfulness for the prosperity that had given Rome the resources to respond to such challenges. This wasn't denial or forced positivity. Marcus was fully aware of the severity of every crisis he faced. But he understood that gratitude provides a foundation of emotional stability that allows you to respond to problems more effectively rather than react from anger. Consider how this works in your daily relationships. Imagine your teenager forgot to take out the garbage again, despite your repeated reminders throughout the week. The bins are overflowing, pickup day is tomorrow, and you'll have to deal with another week of accumulated waste. Your immediate response might be irritation. They never listen. They're so irresponsible. Why do I have to remind them of everything? But what if you paused and found something to appreciate in this situation? You could feel grateful that you have a teenager who's healthy and living at home, something many parents would give anything to experience again. You could appreciate that forgetting to take out the garbage is a relatively minor issue compared to the serious problems some families face with their children. You could be thankful for having a home that generates enough activity to fill garbage bins, indicating a full and active household. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before gaining his freedom, had a unique perspective on gratitude. He understood that even the most frustrating circumstances contain elements worthy of appreciation. When he was mistreated by his master, he found gratitude for the lessons in resilience he was learning. When he was denied basic comforts, he appreciated the mental strength he was developing. This doesn't mean Epictetus enjoyed being a slave or thought his treatment was acceptable. It means he refused to let circumstances control his inner state. He found ways to maintain gratitude even when external conditions seemed to offer nothing to appreciate. The practice becomes even more powerful when applied to difficult people. Let's say you're dealing with a demanding customer who's never satisfied with your service, constantly complains, and makes unreasonable requests that consume enormous amounts of your time and energy. Instead of focusing solely on their difficult behavior, you could practice finding gratitude within the situation. You might appreciate that this challenging customer is helping you develop patience and communication skills that will serve you throughout your career. You could be grateful that dealing with difficult people is expanding your emotional resilience and problem-solving abilities. You might even feel thankful that this person's high standards are pushing you to improve your service in ways that will benefit all your future customers. Seneca developed a specific technique for this practice that you can use immediately. When you notice anger or frustration building, pause and silently list 3 things you're genuinely grateful for in that exact moment. Not generic things like health or family, but specific elements within the frustrating situation itself. If you're stuck in traffic, you might appreciate having a reliable car that's protecting you from the weather. Feel grateful for the music or podcast keeping you entertained, and be thankful for this unexpected time to think or plan your day. If someone criticizes your work, you could appreciate their attention to detail, feel grateful for the opportunity to improve, and be thankful that you work in an environment where people care enough to provide feedback. The practice works because it literally rewires your brain's response to challenging situations. Instead of automatically scanning for problems and threats, you begin looking for opportunities and blessings. This isn't about becoming naive or passive. It's about maintaining emotional equilibrium so you can respond to difficulties from a place of strength rather than reactivity. Here's the remarkable thing. When you're genuinely grateful, you often find creative solutions to problems that anger would have made invisible. The gratitude doesn't solve the broken coffee maker, but it might help you remember that your neighbor mentioned having an extra one, or inspire you to try that new cafe you've been meaning to visit. This foundation of appreciation naturally leads us to the most profound Stoic practice of all, one that puts every daily frustration into ultimate perspective. 7. How remembering death ends every conflict. You've been locked in a bitter argument with your sister for 3 weeks now over something that seemed important at the time. Maybe she made a comment about your parenting style during Thanksgiving dinner, or forgot to invite you to a family gathering, or said something thoughtless about your career choices. The conflict has escalated beyond the original issue. You're both saying hurtful things, dragging other family members into the dispute, and the tension is poisoning every family interaction. You feel justified in your anger. After all, She was wrong. She hurt your feelings, and she hasn't apologized properly. You're determined to make your point, to get the acknowledgement you deserve, to win this argument. The principle matters more than the relationship, right? But what if I told you that Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, had a practice that could end this conflict immediately, not by determining who's right or wrong, but by revealing how utterly insignificant the entire dispute really is? Marcus developed what he called memento mori, literally meaning remember death. This wasn't morbid obsession or depressing meditation. It was the most practical wisdom he possessed for maintaining perspective during conflicts that felt monumentally important in the moment but were actually trivial in the context of life's brevity. In his Meditations, Marcus writes, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This wasn't theoretical philosophy for him. As emperor, he watched trusted friends die suddenly, witnessed plagues sweep through cities, and led armies where death was a daily reality. He understood viscerally what most of us prefer to ignore. Our time here is limited and unpredictable. Let's return to your argument with your sister. Marcus would ask you a simple question. How would you handle this conflict if you knew with certainty that one of you would die within the next month? Suddenly, proving your point seems less important than preserving your relationship. The need to be right pales in comparison to the desire to spend your remaining time together in peace rather than bitterness. This isn't about giving up on your principles or accepting mistreatment. It's about recognizing what actually matters when viewed against the ultimate context of mortality. Marcus faced senators who opposed his policies, generals who questioned his strategies, and advisors who criticized his decisions. He could have spent years locked in political battles, determined to prove his superiority and crush his opponents. Instead, he asked himself whether these conflicts would matter if he died tomorrow, or if they died tomorrow. Seneca, who lived through multiple assassination attempts and political upheavals, understood this principle deeply. He wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." When you truly grasp that every conversation might be your last with someone, you choose your words more carefully. When you realize that every day you spend angry is a day you'll never get back, you become much more selective about what deserves your emotional energy. Consider how this applies to workplace conflicts. You might be furious with your colleague who took credit for your idea in the meeting, or frustrated with your boss who passed you over for a promotion, or angry with a subordinate who keeps making careless mistakes. These feelings seem completely justified. After all, fairness and competence matter in professional settings. But the mortality perspective asks, is this conflict worth spending the limited time you have left on Earth feeling angry and stressed? Not because the issues aren't real, but because your energy and emotional well-being are finite resources that you can choose to invest in building solutions rather than nurturing resentments. Marcus Aurelius faced a particularly powerful test of this principle when dealing with Avidius Cassius, one of his most trusted generals, who declared himself emperor and led a rebellion against Marcus's rule. By all measures, this was the ultimate betrayal, a friend attempting to destroy everything Marcus had worked to build. Marcus had every right to be consumed with rage and thoughts of revenge. Instead, Marcus chose to respond with the mortality perspective. He recognized that both he and Cassius were temporary figures in the vast sweep of history. Their conflict, which felt earth-shaking in the moment, would be forgotten within generations. Rather than letting anger drive his response, Marcus focused on restoring stability to the empire and, remarkably, planned to show mercy to Cassius if the rebellion could be ended peacefully. When Cassius was killed by his own soldiers before Marcus could reach him, Marcus reportedly wept, not with joy at his enemy's death, but with sadness that they had lost the opportunity for reconciliation and understanding. This perspective transforms how you handle every relationship conflict. When you're angry with your spouse for forgetting an important anniversary, the mortality lens asks, do you want to spend this precious evening together arguing, or finding a way to create a beautiful memory? When you're frustrated with your aging parents for being stubborn about their driving or medical decisions, you remember that your time with them is more limited than you want to acknowledge. Epictetus, who faced his own mortality daily as a slave who could be killed at his master's whim, taught that most of our conflicts are based on the illusion that we have unlimited time to resolve them later. We postpone forgiveness, delay important conversations, and maintain grudges because we assume we'll always have another opportunity to make things right. But mortality is unpredictable. The parent you're not speaking to because of some old hurt might not live to see your reconciliation. The friend you're angry with might move across the country before you swallow your pride. The spouse you're giving the cold shoulder treatment might not be there tomorrow to receive your apology. Here's how to practice memento mori immediately. When you're locked in any conflict, pause and ask yourself, if I knew that either I or this person would die within the next month, how would I handle this situation differently? Then ask, what would I regret more, letting go of being right or letting go of this relationship? This practice doesn't solve every disagreement or eliminate the need for boundaries, but it ensures that your conflicts are proportional to their actual importance in the context of life's brevity. It helps you distinguish between hills worth dying on and hills that aren't worth the climb. Your argument with your sister about Thanksgiving dinner will be completely forgotten by history, but the love you share, the memories you create, and the peace you maintain together, these are the things that give meaning to the brief time you have. You've just discovered 7 ancient secrets that transformed Marcus Aurelius from a man who could have been consumed by the anger of ruling an empire into someone who found profound peace amid constant chaos. These aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that you can begin using immediately to transform every moment of potential anger into an opportunity for growth and wisdom. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and encountering the same frustrations that would normally ruin your day. Your commute is delayed by construction. Your coworker interrupts you in the morning meeting. Your teenager leaves dishes in the sink despite your repeated requests. But instead of feeling that familiar surge of anger, you respond with calm strength. You take full responsibility rather than looking for someone to blame, remembering that this simple shift ends conflicts before they begin. You recognize that the people frustrating you aren't trying to hurt you personally. They're simply doing what makes sense to them based on their own circumstances and understanding. You see events clearly without adding the emotional stories that transform minor inconveniences into major crises. When judgment arises, you use the mirror method to find empathy, remembering times when you've acted in similar ways. You expect that some percentage of people will behave in ways that seem inconsiderate or incompetent, which frees you from the surprise and personal offense that fuel anger. You cultivate gratitude even within frustrating situations, discovering appreciation that dissolves anger instantly. And when conflicts feel overwhelming, you remember the ultimate perspective of memento mori, that life is brief, relationships are precious, and most arguments simply aren't worth the limited time you have left on earth. These practices work together like a symphony of wisdom. Each technique reinforces the others, creating a foundation of inner strength that no external circumstance can shake. You're not suppressing your emotions or pretending problems don't exist. You're responding to life's challenges from a place of wisdom rather than reacting from anger. The remarkable thing about this ancient wisdom is that it becomes more powerful with practice. Every time you choose responsibility over blame, understanding over judgment, or gratitude over frustration, you're strengthening your capacity for inner peace. You're building the kind of character that Marcus Aurelius cultivated during his 20-year reign, unshakable, compassionate, and truly free. This is your invitation to join a tradition that spans over 2,000 years. Emperors and slaves, philosophers and ordinary citizens have used these same practices to transform their daily experience from reactivity to wisdom, from anger to peace, from frustration to strength. Your journey toward unshakable inner peace begins with your very next challenging interaction. Will you choose the ancient path of wisdom, or will you remain trapped in the modern cycle of anger and frustration? If this video has shown you a better way to live, please subscribe to the Stoic Vivu channel to continue learning these life-changing practices. Like this video to help others discover these ancient secrets, and share it with someone who could benefit from transforming their anger into inner strength. Together, we can rediscover the timeless wisdom that leads to true peace and lasting happiness.